All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, I guess, to our, it'll be our second meeting now with the virtual technology. Just before we get going, I would ask that you please put your phone on silent mode, and big welcome to all of those that are viewing the meeting either on our web stream or on Eastlink. I don't need to tell anyone that the last 5 weeks or so have been incredibly tough for Canadians, Ontarians, and certainly residents of Haldimand and Norfolk County. COVID-19 represents a public health emergency that is unprecedented in our lifetimes and has turned our normal way of life upside down. And just when we get some tentative signs that we may be turning the corner on the virus, tragedy strikes in the form of the worst mass shooting in Canadian history, an event that I think many of us are still struggling to process, especially during what is already such a difficult period in our collective history. COVID-19 has affected every single one of us in some way and has unfortunately claimed the lives of 30 Haldimand and Norfolk residents. My heart goes out to all of those who are missing their loved ones at this time. And yet, amidst all of this, the pandemic has also shown us just how strong and resilient our community is. We've seen healthcare workers working double shifts to care for the most vulnerable, families banding together to make sure older relatives get their groceries, parents juggling full-time jobs, keeping their kids educated and active, businesses rapidly adopting new strategies to keep serving customers, and local organizations who, when asked if they could help us build life-saving ventilators in the case of a surge of COVID-19 cases, immediately got to work and built us more than 50 in a matter of mere weeks. We've also seen waves of volunteers come forward to help our community in any way they can, and that includes a list of more than 500 people who have registered with Haldimand and Norfolk counties, making themselves available for a range of tasks should they be needed. So while we aren't out of the woods yet, sometimes I think it takes a crisis to show us who we really are, and we should all be proud of this fantastic community that we call home. So with that, I also would like to start out and say another thank you to Ryan Wallace, who's here helping to film the meeting for today. We are going to begin today's council meeting actually with a Board of Health meeting. But before we do, I'd just like to touch on a minor procedural error, or matter rather. We do have a lot of committee reports and correspondence on today's agenda. So if council is comfortable, I'm proposing that we would exclude these from the formal recorded votes, which we had decided to adopt with this technology. So does that work for everyone? Okay. So unless there's any objections, we will just simply raise our hand to vote on those two sections of the agenda, and we will reserve the recorded voting for staff reports, motions, and bylaws. I'm also happy to welcome Mayor Hewitt here today to participate in our Board of Health meeting. He will be a non-voting member, and hopefully we might see him back for others as this crisis continues. So with that, I'll call the Board of Health meeting to order. And are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, if I could have a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Councillor Rabbits and seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favor? And that's carried. Don't forget to put your hand up there, Councillor Van Passen. I can't see him. Is he okay there, Brent?
Okay.
Okay, any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed. The minutes of February 4th are before you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, they'll be declared approved. And first up, we're going to have a presentation from our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Nisathari, and then we'll follow up with some questions from the board at that time. Shankar, I'll turn it over to you.
At the onset, I'll learn how to put this microphone on. At the onset, I want to thank Madam Chair, members of the Board of Health, Mayor Hewitt. Thank you for allowing me to present the perspective of the Public Health Service. I'll be a bit more long-winded today than my normal brief dialogue, but I want to share with you the response of the Public Health Unit towards COVID-19. So rarely would I be so bold as to say this meeting is about saving lives. in Haldeman and Norfolk County, we've been really quite significantly impacted by COVID-19. A key part of the public health service is mitigating and managing risk, and that will pervade through this entire dialogue today. We'll do our very best to try to minimize risk and to mitigate risk in the community, and that works by identifying, managing, and mitigating. So, so when we think of public health management tools, when we think of putting a public health management plan together, there are many things to think about. There's education, dialogue, persuasion, regulation, media, and public health orders. And together, they form a public health management plan. The one thing I'd say before I get into the meat of this discussion today is that the public health service is apolitical. You know, we're governed, and I'm governed by the Health Protection and Promotion Act, and it is by that authority that we act on behalf of the public. So what is the current status of COVID-19 in Haldeman and Norfolk County? Well, I'll just present the snapshot, and then I'll share some more details. There have been 30 deaths in Haldeman and Norfolk County. To put that in perspective, we would expect maybe 20, 25 deaths from car crashes in any given year in Haldeman and Norfolk County. We would expect probably less suicides. So when we think in this past month we've lost 30 people, it's a significant challenge to the community. There are 185 identified cases, and my guess is for every case there are many, many people who are infected, maybe 10 times as much. I share this illustration or this graph because this is a bar graph, and on the left side are the number of cases, and we have different dates and times. And the orange shows something that's very striking. If you look on March 13th is when we believe the first person actually got ill in this county, in both of our counties, but you will see a spike that came in somewhere between March 7th and March 10th. That's the first spike. And then there's a trough. And then there's a second spike. And then there's a trough. Now we're seeing the most recent data suggests that there's an elevation again. We don't really know if that's going to be a third spike or it's going to flatten out. It's hard to know. And epidemics typically have waves. They come and they go. They come and they go. I'll show this slide again with a different set of data elements on it. But needless to say, 30 people have died from COVID-19. Some lived in the community prior to their death. Many lived in a long-term care home. The deaths have substantively been people in their 7th, 8th, and 9th decades of life. We have tested 1,200 people. When you think of it, we've tested basically 1% of the people who live in the health district. We have 185 positive tests, and as I mentioned before, there are many more people who are infected. And this, I think, is important. Anytime there's an epidemic, it's managing the people and managing the disease. And at the health unit, we've taken 4,500 calls. I'm really proud of that because many of those calls reassure people. They put it in perspective. But if there are 30,000 households in this district, we've directly reached probably more than 10% of them. That's a rough estimate. But one other thing I think it's important is the cases are widely distributed through the health district. This slide is important because it shows the age distribution of the positive cases. If you look on the very right-hand side, you will see that most of the positive cases are among the elderly. And that is what we might expect with COVID-19. This is a distribution of the cases in Norfolk County. Now, from my vantage point, I think of Haldeman and Norfolk as one health district. It's the way I've always thought about it. But I realize that people are always interested in what goes on in Haldeman County and what goes on in Norfolk County. So the minority of the cases are in Norfolk County, only about 15%. This is the data from Haldeman County. Now, the issue here is that the cluster, the group of people at Anson Place, form a cluster, and they represent a disproportionate number of people in Haldeman County. I want to share with you that no one is And no group of people are protected from getting COVID-19. There was a positive case among the staff at the health unit. Now, the fact of the matter is we do deal with this all the time at the health unit, and once there was a positive case, we managed it like any other positive case. So I want to share that with you, that in any large employer or any institution, be that an employer or church, that COVID-19 could affect them. So what has Haldimand and Norfolk counties done? What has the health unit done to make a difference in COVID-19? Well, first of all, both in their separate capacities, the mayors of both counties have activated the called an emergency. We've activated the Emergency Operations Center. And the first and foremost goal is to contain, there's containment. Try to contain the disease. Second, if containment doesn't work, if you cannot control the number of people who have the illness, then try to build capacity at the hospital and other acute sites. Number three, early on in the pandemic, we thought that we might run out of ventilators. And if we don't have enough ventilators, we'd have to turn people away from treatment. So the emergency operations centers, the counties, and people in the district actually went to make some build things that might substitute for ventilators. And then I think we have to, and this is hard to think about, we're in the pandemic, but we also have to think of the process of returning to normalcy. There's a new normal in the immediate term, and then there's the long-term battle of, and for me as a parent, one of the things I think about is, how do I get my children back to school? They've been deprived not only of their liberty leaving the house, but how do we get control of this so that the children can go back to school and regain instruction? I put this slide in here because I want us to think about the primary way that people get COVID-19. They get it through respiratory droplets. Cough, cough, cough. Cough, cough, cough. Most people who get COVID-19 have mild to moderate illness. If a young person gets COVID-19, they're going to feel bad. They're going to be stuck at home. They're going to have a cough. They're going to have a fever. They'll have muscle aches. Some of them might have atypical symptoms, such as a nausea, but they'll get better. But if an elderly person gets COVID-19, the result could be catastrophic. I put this slide in here because this sort of tells us the challenge. If we take the top box, the population of people who live in Haldimand and Norfolk counties, there'll be a group of people that aren't infected. Those people who aren't infected, they won't harm anybody. But there's a small percentage of people that will be infected, and that's on the right side. And this is something we only know now, which is that there'll be some people who are symptomatic, and they will cough. And when they're symptomatic and cough, they will make someone else sick unless they're on isolation. But we also know there are a group of people that are asymptomatic. People who don't know they're sick and continue on with their life. And those people can also transmit COVID-19. So it's a serious challenge about how to control COVID-19. So what is the public health unit doing? Well, the first thing is containment. And containment is identify, test, isolate, and follow people's adherence. So it's to find the people who actually have COVID-19 and to test them. And once we test them, we can put them in self-isolation, and then we can monitor adherence. I want to talk a little bit about the chain of transmission. We hear this on TV, and we hear in other enterprises or in other media. Without revealing too much of the confidences, this is a real chain. This is a real chain. So congregate setting could be a daycare center, a nursing home, a prison, a retirement home. The chain goes from a healthcare worker to a child, to another child, to a healthcare worker, to another congregate setting, and get spread of the disease. So what we want to do is when we find someone who's a healthcare worker who's got testing positive, we want to try to break that chain. Here's another chain. Migrant worker travels through the Toronto airport to farm manager, to farm manager's wife, to child, to grandparent, to hospital, and ultimately someone succumbing to it. And the chains that we have the data. We now have data on Haldeman and Norfolk County. It's just not theoretical data. These chains are real. I would say that the airport would be the metaphor and not the migrant worker, but from the airport we can trace things like this. So we really are working to prevent COVID-19 in congregate settings. That's because people who live in congregate settings are the particularly high-risk population. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but containment among people that are older is a priority. It's a priority. It may not be well known that the vast majority of elderly people actually live in the community. And we've advised for many, many weeks on the Public Health Service that if you're over 70, stay at home, self-isolate, get your groceries delivered, have your children or your family bring you supplies. That's what I tell my mother, and she's 79. So that's called the ring fence strategy. But not everyone lives at home. Some people live in long-term care facilities. And in fact, across the province, there are 176 long-term care facilities and 55 hospitals on Outbreak. So there are about 600 long-term care facilities in the province. So this is quite a significant number of places that are on Outbreak. In our district, we have 3 places on Outbreak. One of them where patients are affected, and 2, the containment is limited to the employees. So what do we do at a long-term care home or retirement home to prevent the spread of COVID-19? What do we do? Well, the first thing is that we have a team that deals with nursing homes and retirement homes. The second thing is if the place is not an outbreak, then there are certain things we always do. One is we screen people before they come into the institution. So if you're sick, you're excluded. Visitors are not allowed into nursing homes or retirement homes with very few exceptions. If someone's at the end of their life, we would allow that exception. Otherwise, visitors and others are not allowed to attend. If there are healthcare workers who are coming, they're only allowed to come for selected circumstances. We've asked the doctors in the health district to work out of 1 or 2 institutions as opposed to traveling from institution to institution. Healthcare workers, like healthcare aides, personal support workers, we've asked them to work in one place. So, and then we've asked every healthcare worker who works in a long-term care home or retirement home to wear a mask. So cough, cough, cough. If the metaphor is cough, 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 wearing a mask might make a difference. Now, what happens if we find a place that's actually in potential outbreak? Well, we step that up a bit. We ask every patient to stay in their room. We ask every resident to eat their meals in their room. The reason for that is we want to prevent transmission from a patient who might be sick to another patient who's sick. And then we ask every member of staff to wear a mask, gowns, face shields, and gloves when they treat patients. So there are multiple barriers to try to make sure that people that are elderly don't get sick. New arrivals or visitors are vectors for COVID-19 transmission. The risk of COVID-19 transmission is spread by in part by the number of new arrivals and the number of times that person travels in and out of the health district. That's just not theoretical. That's our experience here as well. I'm going to show you this slide. I wish I had a pointer to show it. This is the COVID-19 data for our health district. We have enough cases now. If you look, the first case we believe, and this is epidemiological assessment. It's always subject to review, but on March 13th was a travel-related case. And then a couple of days later, there were 3 travel-related cases. And then a couple of days later, there was another travel-related case. And then after that, there was another travel-related case. And after that, there were 2 travel-related cases. And if you follow that curve, you can see when we go to April 6th, we have 21 cases. And then it troughs again, and then we get a bump. So our data suggests, and I think the evidence suggests that and it's public policy, which is to stay at home unless you have a good reason to leave the house. I put this in here because that is one of our core messages. Stay at home, stop COVID-19. So what are we doing? What are we actively doing at the health service, to try to effectuate that? Well, there are 4,500 agricultural workers who are joining the Haldeman in Norfolk County. The vast majority of the agricultural workers are going to actually come to Norfolk County and not to Haldeman County. And so we've required agricultural enterprises to have a self-isolation plan. The actual elements of the self-isolation plan are substantively what the government has already promulgated, but as an additional layer, we've asked people to articulate their self-isolation plan. And I thank the board chair for speaking boldly on that topic. We provide education, support, monitoring, and rare occasions enforcement. When you take by capita, there's only one place in Ontario that has more migrant workers, and that's Windsor. They have 8,000. They have 5 times the population. We have 4,200. I have the data with me. So per capita, Norfolk County is an area at greater risk. And it's not a theoretical reality. There's an outbreak in Chatham. They're testing 250 people now. I spoke to the medical officer of health there yesterday. There's an outbreak in Windsor. There's an outbreak in British Columbia. There's an outbreak in a meat packing plant. When a place goes in outbreak, it's adverse to the people because they get sick and they suffer because they're sick. If they're in the self-isolation period, or they're going to be isolated for even longer periods of time, and if they're migrant workers, they're going to be away from their families and their home. The whole idea of being sick at any level, being away from your family, not a great thing. The farmers suffer because you can't have people work when you're on quarantine. That's the law. So they have to pay these people, and I'm sure many of the farmers are concerned about their staff. I'm sure the health. And consumers suffer because we don't have a food source. So if we can't manage outbreaks, we're going to have trouble in many different ways in our society. And if you have an outbreak in a large agricultural enterprise, it's likely to spread to the community as well, just by the nature of the interactions of an agricultural enterprise. People have asked me this many times. Why does Haldeman and Norfolk require people to self-isolate in no more than groups of 3? Well, the first thing I would say is that if somebody came from Florida, or they came from another part of the world, or on a tourist, we would ask them to self-isolate individually. And I don't think Mrs. Chop would mind me saying she's self-isolated, right? So that's what we expect for everybody. And self-isolation means that you stay in your own area, use a separate bathroom, use a separate kitchen, stay away from the rest of your family. When my daughter and I are separated, she's in Puerto Rico. When she comes back, either I'm going to have to self-isolate from her, or she's going to have to self-isolate from me. Those are the rules. Or I'll move into a hotel. Whatever it is, those are the rules. And the reason we self-isolate is to prevent transmission of someone who newly arrived. We saw that graph before, and you can see that that's a real problem. It can be a wave, an epidemic, second wave. It's on our mind. So when you have one person self-isolating, they can't give the illness to anybody else. The risk is only for them, and that's the risk they got from their country or of origin. I hate to bring up a bit of mathematical theory, but if you have 2 people self-isolating, not only do you have the risk that you would get, the person A, the fellow on the left, of getting sick, you also have the chance that the other guy might get sick, and that other guy might give you the illness. So you basically double the chances of self-isolation failing. So if you go from 1 to 2, you will double the chances of self-isolation failing. And if the self-isolation period fails, that means both of those individuals will have to spend a longer time in quarantine. If we put 3 people, then not only can the guy in the red get it from the guy in the blue, and the guy in the red could get it from the guy in the green, they could also have a chain. The green could give it to the blue, could give it to the red, or the blue could give it to the green and give it to the guy for the red. And now it's an exponential to geometric growth. And every person that you add to a bunkhouse or to a self-isolation facility, you increase the chances of an outbreak. And if you increase the chances of an outbreak, you increase the self-isolation period, that means more people are in quarantine. And that's the reason we picked 3. That's the first reason. The second is purely a compassionate reason. It's one thing for me to self-isolate with my daughter. You know, I've known her 21 years. If we have to self-isolate and we have to spend another 14 days together because one of us gets sick, it's not the end of the world. Self-isolating with 3 strangers, people that you've never met before, in a confined space. You never met with them. You got off the airplane and you met with them. That is not consistent with compassion. So as difficult as COVID-19 is, during the self-isolation period, and that is another reason why we elected 3. There's all sorts of literature on how people are adversely affected by quarantine and self-isolation. It's not easy. It's not easy. So that is the reason we chose 3. Is the health unit working to get these applications through? We are. The staff are working, 7 days a week. We have people working every day of the week for these past 6 weeks, and we've had people on mandatory overtime. I'm not an expert on the operations, but Marlene can comment. We've authorized 2,400 farm workers, and we work with the farm workers, with the owners of the agricultural enterprise, to get the plans. And many of them have actually been quite wonderful. I remember getting a letter from the wife of a farmer. She asked me, I don't even know if I want to participate in this because I'm worried about my children. One of the things to think about is many farms have multi-generational families. And multi-generational families are at the biggest risk, where grandma and grandpa can get sick from COVID-19. So, what about other non-residents? If we have migrant farm workers, the province has already closed campgrounds, trailer parks, recreational facilities, marinas. The Public Health Service and I wrote an order asking people that if their primary residence is not in Haldimand or Norfolk County, that they're required not to occupy their vacation homes. The reason for this is it's the traffic back and forth. And I don't speak to this many times publicly, but I think it has to be said. 60% of the cases in Ontario are in metropolitan Toronto. We are only 1 hour from 1.5, 2 hours from metropolitan Toronto. The people going to a vacation home back and forth, it's even, that is problematic. Secondly, it is consistent with public policy. The public policy is stay at home, stop COVID-19. And so, as difficult as this is, I think that is one more strategy. So they're dealing with agricultural workers, requiring self-isolation of new visitors, trying to reduce traffic as best we can. So just a few things, just a summary slide. We isolate and test. That is one of our strategies. If we think of Haldimand and Norfolk counties, we isolate and test. We have strategies to deal with seasonal residents and tourists. That includes closing restaurants and closing other draws. Migrant farm workers. We have public health actions and orders. And a good part of that is education. And for the few people that are recalcitrant, it is guidance and ultimately enforcement. So what are we going to do if containment's not successful? Up to this point, containment is held at Haldimand and Norfolk. It's not. I don't think it's because of anything that the Public Health Service has done. We'd like to think that, but I think in part it's our geography. I think that we've been okay for right now. So we have to, if in fact containment is not successful, then the next thing to think about is how can we plan for additional cases? And that's people with mild, moderate, and severe COVID-19. And we may have the potential to exhaust hospital capacity. Initially, at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought we might have 500 extra deaths. And so we had to think and plan for that. So this is an interim care facility. This is a facility that's in Port Dover. If we had no other place in the hospital to put somebody, the county, working with the hospital and the local doctors, could activate this facility. I know some Board of Health members came to visit that, it's one additional layer of insurance. There's also a facility in Dunnville. That facility helps support the hospital in Dunnville. What if we run out of ventilators? What are we going to do then? Well, from my vantage point, we don't have to. I don't think in a wealthy society, I think we should have enough ventilators. So, and I'll show you a few things. So this is a Genesis ventilator. This was in the county of Norfolk stores. We didn't throw it out 15 years ago. The reason I use this balloon is I don't have a synthetic lung here with me. But this ventilator can keep you alive for many, many hours until you can find a more permanent ventilator. We have 15 of these. We have more ventilators in the health unit than are at the hospitals. So we have 15 of these. Secondly, and you can come look at this, we have a very basic device that allows you to bag somebody. So if someone is intubated, you know, they're getting short of breath, we put this tube, we put this tube like this in their throat, and we bag them. Well, this device, if you don't have a ventilator, can keep bagging you in an automated fashion for hours. And thirdly, a gentleman from Haldeman County, when he heard that we were having this struggle, he made 50 ventilators. He has an aerospace company. We're going to, Ms. Chop and I, and hopefully Mr. Hewitt, we'll all go and see those ventilators, and we'll have a video out on them. So I don't think we have to worry about ventilators. I actually think that we may need them for the next pandemic, but hopefully for not this one. Do we have the video on this one? Well, oh, there we go. So this is a very sophisticated bagging device. It simulates a ventilator, and we'll have 50 of those, hopefully, in the county stores in the next couple of days. Can we go back to the slide deck? While we're waiting for the slide deck, I just want to show you some other things people in the county have made. 150 women in the district made masks. These are homemade masks. If we ran out of masks at the hospital and we had no other choice, we could use these homemade masks. And the homemade masks are pretty good for preventing you from giving the disease to somebody else. So if you're going to see your grandmother and you have no other choice, use a homemade mask if it's not going with one at all. I prefer you don't see them at all, but if you have to, the mask is at least some barrier. So, you know, as a doctor, one of the things is to always tell people the straight-up answers. So should we be worried about a second wave of cases? Well, history would tell us that's what we have to worry about. It happened in the SARS pandemic, and it happened in the Spanish flu. And in the Spanish flu, more people died of the secondary wave than the first wave. And the risk factors are well known. There's increased travel. There's calling a pandemic over prematurely. There's mutation of the virus. There are lots of reasons why it could happen. This is real data. This is a real event. This is the SARS. And if you look on the left at the number of cases, and if you look as time progressed through March of that year, you see the spike. And I think March 27th is the spike. And then it went down. Just like us, it went down. And then they call the outbreak over, and then there's a whole group of cases. Some more people died. There was 17 people actually died on the second. And in retrospect, if we'd held the line, maybe those deaths could have been prevented, or some of them. So what can we learn from public health challenges? You know, the statute was written based on the history of this province, right? We know in SARS there were 475 cases, 44 deaths. We've already had 30, and that's across the province. We've already had 30 deaths in Haldeman and Norfolk counties. And in Walkerton, that was a water issue. I would say that we could have done better on the public health service. There were 2,000 cases and 7 deaths. And Walkerton is a little town. It's a little town. So when I think of this, whenever we think of a public health management plan, we think of a couple of things: the importance of the problem, the measures to quantify risk, the tools that are the tools that are available, not the tools that are disposable. Education, dialogue, policy, rules, law, public health orders. And as many of you know, I've written many orders under my statutory authority. But here's the thing. When we think of this is a difficult challenge. Working together, Haldimand and Norfolk counties have prepared a robust response. There's no disputing that the counties have worked together, the people have worked together to find an appropriate response. I think the next thing is we have to think about how we return to normal. How do we get back to some part of our lives again? And when I look at the data and I think in reviewing the risks and benefits, I think one small step would be allowing access to trails. Now, I'm not an operations guy, and we have two excellent chief administrative officers for each county, and I've asked them to formulate a plan to effectuate that goal so long as, and my ask to them, and I know they would do this, is that we effectuate social distancing and don't increase the risk of any further transmission of COVID-19. So I would close with this. I lived, and I may say this way, I may have repeated this, I lived through the HIV crisis. I graduated medical, this is my 30th year of practice. I lived through HIV. Our culture lived through SARS. I lived through H1N1. My son was a presumptive diagnosis of H1N1. This won't be our first pandemic. I think there'll be others in the future. But I think that we should recognize that the plan is the same. We use every resource that's available to us to manage these public health challenges. I think we'll get through this pandemic like we'll get through other pandemics. We just got to stick together in our plan moving forward. So, Madam Chair, I'm sorry I took more than the 30 minutes I was allocated, but my apologies.
Did a fine job, Jenkins. Thank you. Any questions from the board? Oh, Brian, sorry, can I? Councillor Huffman, Board Member Huffman.
Okay, so you can hear me okay? Okay. I just wanted to clarify a few things because obviously I've had a lot of constituents ask certain questions. So I just wanted to get some clarification if that would be okay. My first question is, employees, you stated in your report that they've been asked to work in one location. Have they been asked or have they been mandated to just work in one location?
So at long-term care facilities, I had a conference call with all the administrators many, many weeks ago, and it was more than an ask. I would use the term strong recommendation, and they're compliant at that time. Then the province passed a law that required it.
Okay.
If we didn't get compliance, I would have written an order to that effect. But the nursing home administrators, they're as worried as, when I speak to them, and we have a number of institutions on watch right now on outbreak assessment, that they were cooperative. So if in fact we weren't able to get compliance voluntarily, we would have ultimately drafted an order to that effect.
Okay, thank you. My next, I just have two more questions. My next one is, obviously we're all aware that there's been some unease in the community in terms of the trails and those types of things being closed, and the issue with the migrant farm workers. And just wanting to clarify, do you make those decisions unilaterally, Dr. Nasathari, or are those done in conjunction with Mayor Chop and Mayor Hewitt, or how are those, if you could clarify for the public how those decisions are made?
So the statute requires me to make those decisions. I do have dialogue with Ms. Chop on a regular basis as board chair, as with other Board of Health members. They call about items that are of interest to them. But at the end of the day, those decisions, if I could add some additional commentary, whenever we think of a public health management plan, the first is always, do we have a legitimate goal? And then how can we effectuate that plan based on a number of factors, including how urgent is the problem, what's the level of risk. But at the end of the day, the inspectors and the service, as it relates to the delivery of programs and policy, are decisions that I make, and we weigh them carefully based on the context. Sometimes there's, they're not easy decisions. It's like practicing medicine. They're not easy decisions. So I hope that answers your question. And depending on the level of severity, it might reflect, how quickly we move. Because COVID-19 was, life and death, we acted as assertively as we could early on. So with nursing homes and those kind of activities, we acted before, like putting on a mask. We did that a month ago. We reduced in our health district, we reduced the number of people congregating much faster than perhaps the provincial authorities. So I don't know, does that answer your question? I want to answer it clearly. I'm rambling a bit, I recognize that.
Can I jump in?
I think that clarifies for individuals in the public. My last one is, my concern is, I haven't heard anything from the public regarding this. This is just my own piece, is that the last couple of days there's been, and I just wanted to clarify, I'm not sure, my apologies, I'm not sure if it's the wording of the media or if it's the wording from our local health unit, is that the term outbreak has been used, and it was used in regards to Parkview Meadows and Townsend, and it was also used in terms of Crescent Care and Cortland. And as it turned out, with the information that we have, I know Parkview Meadows was 2 staff members tested positive, but no residents. And the Crescent Care one, again, it was 1 staff member, no residents. So is the term outbreak the right terminology that we want to use in circumstances like that?
Yeah, no, your point is a very good one. So the academic point is that this is the first time in my professional career that I would call an outbreak where it doesn't involve a single patient. The term outbreak we had to use the term because it's governed by the provincial rule, and they redefined outbreak as 1 staff member. So that's why we use outbreak.
Really?
Now, in our press releases, we always state that the outbreak does not include, if in fact it doesn't include a single patient, we say that. And I think in both previous press releases we have. Your academic point is an excellent one, though. And your perspective would reflect what medicine has historically articulated, which is if there's no patients involved, I wouldn't articulate it as an outbreak. You may call it a cluster or some other epidemiological term.
Right, okay. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Necessari.
You're welcome.
Thanks. If I could just jump in there, actually, just to expand a little bit on Councillor Huffman. The one with the outbreak, I believe I had included that definition with the one update that I had provided, because that was the same situation that we experienced at Norview as well, and was just to give you guys a heads up that it makes it seem, perhaps more aggressive than it is at that moment. In that case, it was just 1 staff member, so.
Yeah, and if I could add, Madam Chair, when we use the word outbreak in medicine, what you really mean is have heightened alertness or heightened awareness. That's why we use the word outbreak. And because COVID-19 can be so devastating to nursing home patients, the moment that we know that even if 1 staff member is affected, we institute a whole suite of extraordinary measures. And so I think that's the policy choice behind it, but it is not congruent with what we can classically think of as an outbreak in medicine.
Okay, and if I could just want to expand a little bit, Shankar, just on Councillor Huffman's question there in terms of the authority to make decisions and so on. Perhaps you could clarify first, the Section 22 orders for board members are only related to contagious disease. It is a special power that you have in the case of a pandemic like this, and it's not that you ordinarily would be able to issue orders.
Yeah, as a general construct, I loathe restricting people's liberty. I really do not like writing orders, because I think that there are many times in public health we can achieve our goals through merely dialogue. And in fact, even in these difficult circumstances, when we can achieve many of our goals through dialogue, education, shaping. But the Section 22 power for infectious disease is broadly written for precisely these issues, is that how do you act assertively on matters where you could have like things like pandemics or epidemics or items of real public health significance.
Okay, so then just to add a little bit more color to this then. So you've been given broad powers in the case of infectious or contagious disease to be able to issue orders under Section 22. The other part with the Health Protection and Promotion Act, and I'm raising this now because obviously, there certainly has been pushback from, the agricultural community and why why Shanker made the decision for 3, migrant workers to a bunkhouse. I think it's important to understand that, Mayor Hewitt and I, although we speak with Shanker on a daily basis, that authority is his, like to the point of your question, Councillor Huffman, and his alone. And so we may not always agree with Shanker on everything, but at the end of the day, it's Shanker's decision. And also in the Health Protection and Promotion Act, it was very, I think it takes, the only option that you would have if board members disagreed with Shanker would be to have him removed. And under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, they have very clearly, made that position apolitical to a certain degree, where it takes 2/3 of a vote by the board to remove your medical officer of health, so that decisions regarding public health are not made at the whim of politicians, which makes sense. And furthermore, even if you did have the vote from a board of health, you would still have to have that termination approved by the province, just as Shanker's appointment is approved by the province. So just to provide some additional clarity to that end.
Yeah, that is the law. When I took this job, I knew that the job is apolitical, and many of my activities are like being a judge. I do, and the legislature, the people, decided this is the way that they wanted to organize the public health service. We're not the only jurisdiction, that has very defined matters to protect public health officials from political, and I would never use the word whim, but some level of political pressure. It's the nature of what we have to do. In this particular case, there's always soul searching. When I drive home, there's always soul searching, like about what action, when to do it. My own children argue with me about certain of the things because they too have their perspective. But at the end of the day, we just have to make, and sometimes I have to give closure. It's as a teacher, that's a hard thing to do, is to say, well, I know that you have your point, and I tell that to my kids. They're like, well, you got a great point, but I think at the end of the day, this is the best decision we can make. But thank you, Madam Chair, for clarifying what the statute is and what our responsibilities are related to that.
And Chair, just so we're clear, I wasn't
No,
making any suggestion
it's,
there whatsoever.
If I could share, as a matter of how a democracy functions, the people get to vote from my vantage point, they get to vote for their elected officials, and they have to advocate for them. And then there's certain positions that are shielded from political influence, which is judges, medical officers of health. And so I think that's okay. I'm glad that you brought it up.
Councillor Martin, I saw your hand there.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor or Board Member Huffman spoke on it. I wanted to specifically chat about migrant workers and outbreaks.
Board Member Kravitz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, can you hear me all right through my mask? Yes. My question was with regards to different jurisdictions and some of the questions that's been posed to myself and likely my colleagues is why do certain districts have certain provisions while others do not? And rather than speculate, I was hoping maybe you could comment on perhaps why medical officers of health in different municipalities are choosing different levels of restrictions to put in place. And I have some more questions, but I think I'd like just to start with that one because it's a difficult question for me to answer why an adjacent community would have different decisions being made. And a lot of this is flowing from provincial statute and law, which further complicates why we're not seeing a uniform response across municipalities in Ontario. And I just want to provide you an opportunity to maybe clarify how that can be, and what maybe the specific circumstances are to Norfolk County that have influenced your decision making.
Sure. No, thank you for the question. Ontario has 34 autonomous health districts and 34 medical officers of health and 34 boards of health. And in part, I think the statute was designed to deal with the local realities or the local preferences. So we have some challenges which are sort of unique to other districts. We have per thousand or per capita, we have the largest number of migrant workers coming. So that's always a challenge. Secondly, we have a population of some people that have vulnerable health status. We have 4,000 Low German Mennonite residents in the western part of the health district. Many of those families are multi-generational and have otherwise, we work to try to provide public health services to them. We have 2 reserves adjacent to the health district, and that weighs on my decision making as well. And then, so those are sort of the local realities of this health district. And then there are things that are contextual. I'm very cautious. This is my 30th year of practice. I still think medicine is about saving a life. I think that most people would think that I practice medicine cautiously. If I think that we can do things to save lives, we would do them. And we did them before other people may have chosen to do them. And those are just individual level decisions we have to make. The other thing I'd share, and share this, I've not shared this otherwise, as it relates to agricultural farm workers, other districts are using our guidance documents. They're using our strategies. They've asked for them. They've asked for them. The difference, I think, between our district and others is that fundamentally I asked, not I personally, but the Public Health Service asked affirmatively for people to state what is the self-isolation plan for these congregate living situations, because we saw this as a high-risk activity. And to the best of our ability, we were going to try to modulate them. Now, the countervail to that was it took a lot of people at the health unit to be reassigned to follow up on these plans. And so those are, I think, the contextual issues. I think that we owe it to migrant farm workers to have them have self-isolation plans that work. I think it's consistent with compassion. It's also consistent with good practice, and it's good for farmers. So those are the things that might make it maybe different here, but it's not as different as we might think, because as an operational item, the people who run agricultural enterprises and migrant workers are supposed to follow all of those rules. To stay 6 feet apart, to make sure that people self-isolate for 14 days. And I think that we have to recognize now that we already have outbreaks in areas that are proximate but not adjacent. So Chatham, Windsor, and it is concerning. It is of concern to me. So sorry for that long-winded answer, but I'm happy to provide additional clarification as well.
Can I jump in there as well? So it's not just a resource-based decision, though. It's also in terms of some of the challenges. I suspect that what you're getting at, Councillor Rabbits, is some people, why are boat ramps open in location X, but they're not open here? Or car washes is another popular topic. A lot of it comes down to the interpretation of the provincial guidelines, or rules rather, and what their intent was when they created that rule. So in the case of marinas, you'll see that there were a number of locations. People like to say, well, how come marinas are open there, but they're not open in Norfolk County? I'm not sure who they're getting their advice from, but I'm going to read you just a quick letter while I have a chance. Dear so-and-so, thank you for your letter about access to marinas. I appreciate hearing your views and concerns. As you know, our government has issued a list of essential workplaces. Under the emergency order, there are very limited circumstances where marinas can be open. Each marina must determine whether it fits into any of the categories, and if so, make a decision as to whether to stay open. A marina may operate, but only to the extent necessary to enable individuals to access their primary place of residence, including Indigenous communities. For example, there is no land-based route to access the residence. Accessing seasonal cottages is inconsistent with our government's message to Ontarians to stay home and stop the spread. Marinas may operate to support other essential services, including law enforcement, fire, and emergency services. Marinas may also operate to support businesses that produce food, including by fishing or to support the food supply chain. Marinas are not to support recreational or sport fishing. These guidelines set out our government's position on the intent of the relevant paragraphs. Thank you once again for your letter. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario. So the allegations that we aren't correctly interpreting, the list of essential businesses per the province, I think that, we're doing our best to interpret the law, and while it may not be properly applied in other municipalities, that's not a knock against Alderman and Norfolk for actually, making the proper interpretation. It's our job to uphold the orders that have been issued by the province, and that's what we're doing our best to do. In the case of car washes, there is washing your car, this is where the ambiguity comes in. Is that essential maintenance? It's tough to determine, right, whether it is or isn't. So it has formed the basis of conversation. Shanker's spoken a great deal about it. Obviously, if it's a car wash where you're not interacting with anybody, the risk of something happening is extremely low. So, it's also a risk-based analysis that goes into it.
Yeah, so, if I could add, Madam Chair, we have to accept that the policy is stay home unless you have some essential item that you have to do, stay at home. The challenge is that there are some apparent inconsistencies. When I get emails from people, they ask me one thing versus another. The second is that some of these rules are not promulgated. The rules promulgated by the health district we own those, but many of these rules are promulgated by the provincial government. And quite honestly, it would have been my preference that the rule should have been stay home unless you have an essential reason to leave the house. And that would have been easier as a regulatory regime, but that's not what we ultimately ended up with. Some places are open, some places are not. So I think that's one of the challenges for interpretation. But I always acknowledge when people say that, yes, I recognize you may think that it's inconsistent, and maybe it is, but we're doing the best in the pandemic to try to apply the rules as best we can.
Thank you for all of that information. I really appreciate that, both of you. Thank you very much. My next question is along the lines of enforcement and the issuance of orders. It is a controversial topic, and I don't think we should shy away from providing a rationale. People need to know what they can and cannot do, and there are individuals that have received orders, those that have complied, and there are individuals in our community that are sort of trying to tap into that rumor mill. They haven't actually been issued an order, they're unsure, and rather than directing their questions towards those that have the expertise and knowledge to speak to them, they're asking their friends, they're asking their family, and they're relying on often information they're getting from different types of media. And to that end, I would appreciate, before we conclude our conversation today, to go back to that slide about those different orders that were issued. I appreciate you're trying to be brief and get through your entire slide deck, and I would appreciate if maybe you had an opportunity just to actually get through that one slide that had some orders that were issued, just to kind of give us a really high-level explanation about what was contained on that particular slide deck or that particular slide.
Sure,
I'm also very interested in knowing a little bit more about your relationship with our bylaw team, because those are our frontline staff members that are often interacting when an order is issued, and they often will be getting the brunt of the complaints and sometimes a confused response for those that are ill-informed or uninformed. So in maybe your your high-level overview, if you could just explain your relationship with our bylaw team and how that relationship works.
Sure. So I don't have all the, I don't want to comment on the orders without having them all right in front of me, printed out, but I'm happy to comment on them generally. I have to go to the slide, though. Okay. Well, let me get the slide here. So, no, so with regards to bylaw, so when and Paula's here, and she might be able to comment on on how bylaw works. Bylaw is under the supervision of Paula, and it was part of the adherence or enforcement team. I authorize, in some cases, now these are legal constructs, I also have authorized under the statute, under these extraordinary circumstances, certain bylaw officers and other enforcement individuals to effectuate adherence. So maybe if we could, Madam Chair, if there's a way we could ask Paula to comment on that, would that be proper?
So under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, under Section 41, the medical officer of health is allowed to authorize people to act under his direction for the purposes of inspections and inquiries to enforce the act and orders under it. So recently, for example, a number of people have been appointed to the bylaw team, though they're not MLEO or municipal law enforcement officers. Specifically, though, acting under the direction of the medical officer of health as it relates to the farm migrant orders in particular. So that group of people, day to day, operates under the management team at Public Health, and our medical officer of health establishes the order, and I presume works with, and you would know better than me exactly how that relationship works, but works with the public health staff to effectuate the farm plans, the orders, and then they train our inspectors who then participate in the, I'll call it more of an auditing function as it relates to the migratory farm workers. In the event there was ever an actual enforcement issue, we do have certain bylaw staff who are MLEOs. They are bylaw officers appointed by the county who also have been authorized by Shanker in the event that we were to go to the level of an enforcement proceeding, which is basically a prosecution under the Health Protection and Promotion Act for a failure to follow the requirements of whatever that order is. So that's not limited to the farm migrant worker order. That's also involves, perhaps on some level, the most important and urgent aspects of those are people who are under self-isolation orders and who aren't adhering to them. There are individuals who our bylaw staff, have served personally, requiring them to self-isolate. And a failure to do that has sort of two potential consequences. One is a prosecution, which is not perhaps as helpful as we might want it to be if somebody actually needed to be self-isolating and wasn't. The second option is an urgent application to the Ontario Court of Justice asking the court to require someone to attend at a hospital or similar facility and for the police to be authorized to take that individual there. So we've not had to do that yet, but that is sort of how enforcement works under that act. If your question is other kinds of enforcement, so provincial regulations, I don't know if it goes that far, so I don't know if I need to speak to it, but
Thank you, Paula. I think that covers it. I appreciate your expertise in weighing in on that topic. It is a topic that has come up, and frequently the source of the question is as a result of having an interaction with a bylaw employee that we have. And so that's why I thought I would just ask about the reporting relationship or how that works with our public health team, and you've answered that question today. Thank you very much for that. I guess without having our IT individual currently for the slide deck, I imagine we'll be able to get those in another form. I don't believe I had them provided to me, so I'll look forward to that follow-up.
Sure, I could call you and we could go over the different orders. I'm happy to do that. Would that be helpful, or do you want me to comment?
Oh, I was just hoping for a copy of the slides.
Oh, yeah, no, I can give it to you at the end today.
Oh, great.
Okay, great.
But I did have one more question, and I would appreciate just a high level about pools. I've received a number of calls about what am I allowed to do, what is considered essential maintenance. It's a large asset. I would say it's comparable to owning a home or an automobile. You wouldn't tell someone not to maintain a very large asset like that, considering it also has water. Water could stagnate. We are hopefully getting into some warmer weather, though I was trying my best not to roll my eyes when the snow was flying, and I had people telling me about opening up their pools. But the reality of offering a pool service is there's a lot of swimming pools in our area, and these operators, they really want to get ahead of that workload, because if they don't start and they get into the ground and into the swimming pools, even when there's snow flying early in the season, they're going to have a backlog of service and tickets that they just won't be able to fill. And so that's a concern. There's also a concern with what is considered essential maintenance, and are people able to get water in their pools or not? And these are the types of questions that I've been asked, and part of the reason why I'm bringing it up is I'm just concerned about the amount of persons that may try to do this on their own. And they may not have the expertise or the knowledge. They might invite others that might be able to sort of do that, and that's going to be going against our intent of minimizing contact and community spread and maintaining that physical distance. Fortunately, it's an amenity that's outside. So having listened to some of my concerns, and I'm basically just articulating what's been emailed to me. We want to know pools. What's an essential service and what is not?
Paul is going to take that.
So just to clarify and remind people, there's orders that the medical officer of health issues that he's directly responsible for, and this is not one of them. So the pool issues is an essential business question, and that is under the province's own act and regulations. We worked this one out, and to my knowledge, it is acceptable to the industry, which is that yes, it's the language of the act requires people involved in property maintenance to be limited to 3 things: security, sanitation, and I can't remember the third. Security, sanitation, and I'm sorry? But there was a word before it, and I can't remember it. In any event, it doesn't matter. Sanitation, security, something like that. So what we worked out with them was, okay, pools, as it starts to get warmer, yes, West Nile becomes an issue, standing water becomes an issue, plus the maintenance of a pool has a certain chemistry, which also becomes an issue when it gets too warm. So we basically said, starting May, go ahead and start booking your trips and your visits and get it all done before the heat arrives. And as far as I know, that's what's happening.
Any further questions? Mayor Hewitt, you're very quiet. Councillor Columbus. Oh, this is the first time I've seen you. Oh. Councillor Columbus, where have you been this whole time?
Sorry.
I think I preferred our screen situation last week better. Can't hear you. Sign language?
On here. Let's try this.
So you're showing mute on the bottom, Mike. If you is there on your screen, you can see there's a microphone with a line through it.
Okay, am I on now?
They're perfect.
Good, thank you. Yes, I too have been receiving many calls about the 3-person per bunkhouse rule, and I understand how seriously our medical officer of health has taken it. But Norfolk County, Ontario's Garden, is one of the leading producers of fruits and vegetables, supplying majority of the fresh produce to wholesalers and also grocery chain stores during the months of June, July, August, September, October even. And I just wondered if Dr. Necessary has any concern, or the Ontario government has any concern about, with this 3-person rule, the impact it's having on reduced production of fruits and vegetables for Ontarians and Canadians to consume in the next few months. because the acreages, from what I hear, production is going to be down probably to a significant standard. Just wonder if you can shed some light on that. And also, I would like to know if I heard Leamington had 8,000 migrant workers. Just wonder, are they on a 3-person per bunkhouse ruling as well, just Norfolk Cullinan?
So I'm obvious, food is an important public health priority, access to food, and you know, my dad owned greenhouses, and he worked at the research station in Vineland, so agriculture, I know it's close to how my family made a living. This 3-person per bunkhouse rule is only during the self-isolation period. And that self-isolation period is for everybody, no matter what health district you're in. If you're in, and you cannot work during your self-isolation period, those are the federal rules. So once the self-isolation period is over, people can live in their bunkhouses as they might otherwise, so long as they can meet all the other rules of maintaining the 6 feet distance. And in many ways, these bunkhouses are like large family homes. So the real difference is that in other districts, they are not asking for 3 people in a bunkhouse to self-isolate. They're still required to self-isolate, and during that self-isolation period, they're required not to work. The difference in Haldeman and Norfolk counties are that we are restricting the number of people in the self-isolation residence. The government recognized that this is a challenge throughout the province and offered a $1,500 per worker subsidy as well. There is a countervail to this. If someone is not properly self-isolated, they can end up spreading COVID-19 to the entire bunkhouse, and then the entire bunkhouse could theoretically be on quarantine. That is what happened in British Columbia, is my understanding, and then the farmer could not operate his enterprise because his entire workforce was disqualified from working. But to the first extent, I know I'm a bit long-winded, food is important. And you know, we're effectuating the community gardens, and I'm all for that, and we can put together plans for that. Farmers markets, because it's fresh food, we're trying to formulate plans for farmers markets. And anything that we can do to positively impact the food and maintain also the safety of the constituents of this district, we would do it, and I would support it. So sorry for the long-winded response, Mike.
Thank you for your answer.
You have any further follow-up with that, or? I think Shanker tried to highlight earlier that it's equally being done to protect the farmers, because if you end up with 20 people in a bunkhouse and your risk is substantially increased of those 20 contracting it versus having 1 or 2 or 3, that, you know, if one of those 20 does come down with something, the quarantine period for the entire 20 is going to be extended. So in many ways, it's actually protecting the farmers, particularly in light of some of the outbreaks that we're seeing in Chatham right now and Leamington. You know,
an outbreak in a farm would require testing, let's say 20 people, and then all the close contacts of those 20 bunkhouse residents would go on self-quarantine. So it could, theoretically, if you have one outbreak in a bunkhouse, you could end up self-quarantining 80 or 100 people. It's in Chatham, they had to do a test on 250 people, which would be basically the amount of tests that we might do for 2 nursing homes. So it's a big risk for sure, for the farmer, for the people affected, and for the community overall.
so I guess, Councillor Columbus, if I could just kind of follow up a little bit, this ties into the question from Councillor Huffman earlier, just so that you're aware again, you know, of the Health Protection and Promotion Act and how Shanker's decisions are his and his alone. And the only option to those, we each have an equal weight in our vote. If you do not agree with the decision for 3 men to a bunkhouse, would be to move for his removal, which I'm going to assume you're not prepared to do. Councillor Columbus.
No, I'm not prepared to do that.
Any further questions?
Push this button here, okay, you can hear me? Just if I may, and I appreciate you all having me here today to observe, but to provide maybe a little bit more color, I can certainly say that our meetings and conversations with Dr. Shanker has not been always easy, and I have not been the easiest probably in many instances, but we continue to challenge our public health unit in every way for them to appreciate our position as the elected folk, but also for us to understand and appreciate their position from a health perspective. And while I can say that it's our intent to ensure that we continue to provide that public safety net for our communities, we're always looking for ways to protect our businesses locally as well, and ensuring that if there's an option for pools to be able to continue to work, or landscaping companies, or car washes, as we will, it's both Mayor Chops and my position to try to find that solution that will protect the public, will satisfy the public health unit's position, and at the same time, it gives those local business owners an opportunity to gain some revenue and income. So that's an important piece to that as well. And we are trying to navigate a difficult position with no help whatsoever from our provincial MPP. We've had virtually none whatsoever in that perspective, and that's been a very big frustration for all of us, because it's the province that decided what was essential, what was not essential, and it's the province that should be able to define that. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to truly get to the bottom of a lot of those issues and questions that you all are getting. And we field them all. We try to determine what is essential, what's not essential. We ask for support from the provincial office, and we get the same rhetoric that suggests that we're adding more and more layers to this bureaucracy that exists, and we're not. Shanker has specifically put a number of orders in. Some we may agree, some we may not, but it's certainly his position to make that decision, and we've tried to support our public health unit in the last 6 weeks to ensure that we keep the community together in looking for a better tomorrow versus questioning what it is that we're doing today. And I, like everybody else, want to see us get to that other end, and hopefully we'll get there soon. So again, I thank you for having me here, and know that we're fighting as hard for our communities, as hard for our businesses, and as hard for our farmers, as hard for our manufacturers, as well as we are fighting for those elderly people who are in those long-term care homes that are struggling as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Hewitt. I would echo everything you just said. I mean, and as you pointed out already, we both have, we may not always agree with every detail of Shanker's plans, but he is our medical officer of health, and it is our duty to support him in the decisions that he makes for the better of our community. Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thanks again for coming, Mayor Hewitt. We're just going to do our confirming bylaw and so on, which I'm sure you probably would rather get out of here.
The sunshine.
Bye-bye.
All right, with that then, if I could have a motion to confirm the proceedings of the Board of Health held on April 28th, 2020. Could have a mover, Councillor Rabbit, seconded by Councillor Michelli. All those in favor? That's carried. And I guess with that, we'll adjourn the Board of Health. Thank you very much, Shanker and Marlene, for coming today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for everything.